Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, where I get the chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas.
Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. I am George Sosha, Senior Vice President of Brand Awareness at Reveal. Each Friday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern, I host an episode of eDiscovery Leaders Live, where I get the chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. Past episodes are available on the Reveal website. Go to revealdata.com, select resources, then select eDiscovery Leaders Live. My guest this week is Josh Blandi. Josh is CEO and co-founder of UniCourt. So now we are getting into some of the related areas. UniCourt is a SaaS offering using machine learning to disrupt the way court records are organized, accessed, and used, providing legal data as a service, or LDAAS, if you didn't have enough acronyms already, via its APIs to AmLaw 50 firms and Fortune 500 businesses for accessing normalized court data for business development and intelligence, analytics, machine learning models, process automation, background checks, investigating, and underwriting. So you can tell from this description, there's a lot of overlap potentially between what Josh and his organization provide and what we in the eDiscovery space deal with regularly. Josh, welcome.
Great. Hey, George, thanks for having me on today.
Well, thank you for joining us. And even though I gave a brief overview of who you are and what your organization does, let's start with you going into greater detail. First, tell me about yourself, and then about UniCourt, its background, and where it is today.
So I'm Josh Blandi, the founder, CEO, and the co-founder and CEO of UniCourt. And we started UniCourt back in 2014. It was actually a side project from another company I'd founded. And essentially kind of how we got involved in this per se was, I had another company I'd founded that was using legal data actually for marketing purposes at the time. And we found it really so difficult and challenging to be able to access court data in kind of a real-time, on-demand bulk fashion. And we thought there had to be a better way to acquire this data. And that's when we kind of spun this off into a company in 2014 and have really been fixed on this concept of legal data as a service. Basically, what that means is we go out and we aggregate court data across the United States, all the state and federal courts. Similar to a lot of the work that's done in eDiscovery, we put a lot of structure on top of this data. We link it to a lot of other public record data sets, and then we make this available through APIs.
Aggregating court data might sound like a simple task, but I know it's no mean feat to accomplish. How do you go about A, gaining access to all those different sources of data, and then B, pulling all of that together?
Yeah, it's a process. I think last estimate I'd seen there's well over 18,000 different court systems that operate in the United States. United States is a little bit unique from a lot of other countries, and that we have all these different systems kind of operating that roll up and down to each other. And these could range from administrative courts, tribunal courts, to your county and state courts, and on up to the federal level. And imagine that each court's doing things kind of in their own little environment. They're all doing them their own little way. With really no standardization, no common best practices, no data standards. And so what we do is we go out and acquire that or collect that from the courts, depending on how we can access that information. And we see a lot of value in kind of standardizing those data sets and linking it so that essentially, you have one set of APIs to access, one standard set of APIs to access all of these different systems under one platform. And yeah, to your point, it's not a business that's built overnight, right? It's because imagine each court system is its own separate integration that we have to maintain and do all those things to it, right? But you 100 courts here, 100 courts there. Now you're at 1,000, and now you're at a couple of thousand, and pretty soon you begin to see you're making a significant dent in it. The one thing that even though there are all these different systems, there's obviously these large population centers, right? So, Los Angeles County Superior Court system is larger than some whole states put together, right? So there are some, I think we cover about 55% of the U.S. population, bordering on 60, and those are probably say in the top, like say 300 or 400 courts, 500 courts in the United States.
So in the end, before we get to what you do with the data, in the aggregate, about how much data are you dealing with here?
I want to say right now we're probably bordering on, well over 250 million cases. Maybe this comprises, 500 million documents in terms of, docket entries. Maybe this is like, at this point, 5-10+ billion docket entries. So it's a large amount of data, and there's one thing about aggregating data sets. It's another thing about kind of cleaning these up so you can actually consume them. And then the last piece that we see a lot of potential in is linking them to other data sets. I always kind of describe UniCourt, even though our roots are in legal tech, and that's kind of where we started at court records. As a company, we're really actually a public records company. We just happen to be very focused on court records, but we also collect all the bar data across the United States. Again, that's important for linking to court records to identify attorneys. We collect Secretary of State data because that's important for linking to corporate entities and to law firms, right? And normalizing them, as well as a lot of other different data sets, agri data sets, publicly traded data sets that really link. What we're trying to zero in on through our APIs is being able to give people the ability to access this information, merge it with their internal data sets, and that's when you can really derive some real intelligence and value from it.
So just focusing on court decisions for a moment, although the decisions have a somewhat similar structure in how they're laid out, of course they vary from one court system to another, from one judge to another, and even with one judge, from one decision to another. How do you go about cleaning up that data so that you've got cleaned up and normalized data to work with?
Yeah, dealing with the state court documents, I should say just court documents in general, is a real challenge. And I think actually folks in eDiscovery understand this better than anybody, being that the large volume of documents that you chew through. But yeah, it's a very similar problem that you deal with, in that you have, imagine like a number of variations that you see in the types of documents. A similar type of document can be huge. Like I used a good example of like a proof of service is just something very simple that gets filed on a case, right? Very standard, we served this person, this place and time. But imagine now every vendor is using their own version of that proof of service, right? And over the years, those versions have changed. And on top of that, a lot of the documents, specifically the older documents, are scanned images, right? So they have to be, image processed and then extracted information out of it, right? So what we're really after, like right now, our big focus is on standardizing the metadata from the courts. So this would be things like, the parties, the types of parties, the representation type, the case types, we're working on the standardization of the docket entries themselves, right? What type of event was this, right? Who's related to these events? What other events are related to each other, right? And the classification of documents themselves. I think the foundation we've laid kind of in our new APIs will allow us to kind of standardize that. And then we can begin to grab further into the documents themselves. So we can tag different information within document, maybe like causes of action, for example, or issues involved, or linkage to laws, or linkage to case law, or linkage to amounts, right? Or linkage to different information that people may want to pull out of that documents once we begin to index it.
So when you get access to the documents initially, the court documents, do they come with their own metadata, or do you have to identify that content within there and then populate fields with what you've derived from the documents?
Yeah, they come with typically very little metadata. They might have like a document description and like a cost and some other metadata related to the filing of it, but per se they don't have any other useful information. And then kind of on top of that, even some of the courts will OCR this themselves, but they're not really great at it. There are a few decent examples, like Florida does a better job than others, but they're really focused on taking out sensitive information like bank account numbers, social security numbers, dates of, sensitive information in the documents. But yeah, we often find that even after a court is OCR this document, that we're still better off image processing that document ourselves, and then OCR and indexing it. We'll get better results. I think in some cases, like 50, 60, 70% of the information is accurate from a court filing for what they've indexed versus what can be done outside of that.
And 50 to 60% that's a really low number. That's not a very good outcome.
No.
Yeah. You've mentioned several times the APIs. What sort of access and capabilities do those provide to people looking to use your data?
So yeah, kind of the value in our APIs is really this concept of us picking up the latest, people relying on our platform and APIs to pick up the latest cases being filed, to be able to kind of have access to those cases on a on-demand, real-time fashion, right? So as things evolve in the case, they can pull that additional information down. And really just us relying on our infrastructure to feed this as a service rather than kind of, acquiring a bulk data set and running it through. And I think that provides like a lot of opportunities, both within the law firm market, legal market, but outside of the market. There really is. I get excited about it because I always feel like litigation data is one of these data sets that has pretty much been unexplored and not very accessible. It has been sitting unstructured to a large degree in some of these large providers like Lexis or Westlaw with paywalls, and the only way to be able to consume it is through an app experience, right? And I feel like this data set, litigation is a really important data set in any industry, right? Meaning that at any major company, that is something that is a data set that they should have in their systems. And I think it's through our offering and through what we're doing with APIs, we're kind of unlocking that so people can pull this information, or companies and organizations can pull this information out, merge it again with their valuable information that nobody else has, right? And derive some value from it. And I can give you maybe just a couple really good examples just of how people use it. I'll maybe start with like the law firm, how we see firms using it, and we can dive into even other industries to show you just the breadth of the potential of this data. Like in the firm markets, we see things like, hey, they want to track their key clients or potential clients, right? So they want to know anytime they're involved in new litigation. they want to do some analysis, business intelligence on their clients. Like, for example, in this industry, who are the players? How much litigation is taking place? Who's doing all the work for that litigation, right? Where do they fit in that picture of the litigation? Maybe you're a firm that's very good at doing specific things, right? Very specialized. How much of that takes place in an industry annually across the United States, right? So you can really start to drill down into, some of that business intelligence to drive, more efficiency and process flows, and also divert, capital investment into, things that you're really good at as a firm. We also see a lot in kind of the strategy. So being able to outline a strategy that works, that's data based, right? That's not based on, well, it depends. It's right. It's saying, hey, we've analyzed, thousands of cases involving this judge, right, and this opposing counsel or this opposing firm, and here's what we believe to be the best strategy for you, to defend this, for example, or as a plaintiff in it, right? We also seeing it be used a lot in the process automation. So imagine like you're a firm and you have these matters, or you have this client experience platform, right? And you want to feed new lawsuits in so that attorneys know about their clients being sued. You want to feed in the docket information for your docketing team and to your matter management systems to organize what's been filed, what opposing has filed, the docket entries, calendaring, process and workflows that you want to implement in your matter management systems, right? So there's a ton of potential of how this data can flow through. Also, like I go back to merging it. Firms have really valuable data. They have like how many billable hours that we charge for this particular task that we did, right? And how much of that task is out there, right? So I think there's tremendous potential of firms. I think when I look at it from the law firm market, 3 years ago, there wasn't a lot. 4 years ago, when we first started making APIs, there wasn't a lot of interest from law firms. And something happened in 2019 where everybody woke up, like every other industry, saying, hey, we should be getting all these other data sets that are out there now. They're accessible, and we can do some amazing things with them. Now, kind of just switching off law firms, think about it.
Before we switch off law firms, one more
Sure.
question on them, and then we'll move on to other types of organizations. What are some of the most creative things you've seen law firms do using your APIs and the data available through them?
I see a lot of work in kind of the alternative legal services, providers, in terms of being able to take tasks that were traditionally, law firm tasks, basically within law firm markets. Like, for example, Incubator does this really well from Baker Hostetler, right? Where they're developing really, using ours and lots of other data sources, outsourced basically legal services at scale, so they can do something really well for very cost effective, but also tying that in with like the expertise of what a firm has to offer. And, nobody wants to do some of these root tasks, right? Imagine that most of that's going to be done in the future through process automation, but where you can insert an attorney into that process that actually can give guidance, right? And I think that's really where the future is heading, where attorneys do what they do best, and firms do what they do best, which is give guidance, and the rest of it I think could be automated. So I see a lot of amazing things that are happening across legal on that front.
Yeah, so you were going to then turn to other types of organizations?
Yeah, I think it's very broad. Like imagine insurance companies, right? Now they can automate on the commercial lines. They can automate underwriting of insurance, because now they have an idea of how much litigation risk a business is, which is a huge chunk of what they insure, right? Think about it from a claims perspective, right? They can automate, how they deal with claims that go legal, right? Is this a claim that's handled by an experienced firm that will take us down the trial route if necessary, right? Are we better off settling early, or is this a family attorney that's handled 2 insurance cases in his career? And I think we should push them down further down the route before we settle with them, right? So at the end of the day, I think they can use this type of data to beat their current actuarials. I also see it more in the background check, due diligence, compliance, markets where they're already aggregating data from lots of different sources, but not so much legal data, and that's changing. I think that's an important mixture of that. Intelligence is another one. And then we also see it in things like news and media, right? Cases are oftentimes the foundation of great stories, and being able to have a feed of those stories is critical.
Where do you see some gaps in terms of types of organizations that could be using better use of this data, better use of your APIs, but aren't yet doing so much?
I do think big law has a long ways to go. I mean, from the pulse I have, they all say they're doing amazing innovation things, and I'm sure they're doing some amazing things. But I really feel like from the interaction I've had with, say, the AmLaw 200 firms, that maybe only about 10, maybe 20% are actually have data science teams, and are actually working and have high objectives to integrate data science into their operations. So I think there's a lot of improvement for a lot of the bigger firms. I also think, like, honestly, I don't get a lot of interest from eDiscovery, and I think there's tremendous potential in eDiscovery in terms of uncovering information that's buried in court documents, right? So I think your industry already has an amazing set of tools to do this, right? I mean, I always am amazed at what is happening in the eDiscovery. I mean, you really are the first kind of legal technologist in law, my real legal technologist in law. I remember when we first started in 14, we would go to these legal tech conferences, and it would be like 90% would be eDiscovery companies, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. It was certainly at that time. I mean, once upon a time, you go back far enough, say the late 90s, and it was about legal technology, much more broadly speaking. But for a number of years now, it's been all about eDiscovery. I think that's been beginning to broaden a bit again, and that's where I think organizations like yours are also getting some of the attention that they had trouble garnering when eDiscovery was such a focus.
Hmm.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier on, and that I mentioned in the intro, is that you're making use of machine learning as a disruptive mechanism. What are you doing with machine learning?
Yeah, that's a great question. So imagine we get a lot of this unstandardized, unstructured data. So I'll use one very simple example, how a court classifies, say, a type of case. We literally see millions of different case types across the jurisdictions we cover. And imagine every time a case hits our system, it goes through a machine learning process that's actually categorizing type of case, representation type, party type, docket type, right? Eventually, like, causes of action, issues, right? So that and we have great feed for it, and it works amazing. I mean, just to give you an example, when we first kind of rolled out machine learning to categorize our type of cases, right? It would initially, we were getting up to like it would go through a triage process, right? Where if it hadn't seen it before, didn't know what to do with it, it would serve it up to a triage of 3 humans, right? And those 3 humans would categorize it. Now today, when it serves it up to the triage of 3 humans, oftentimes the humans are wrong and the machine, it was correct, and it suggests a classification of it. Meaning that now, like, it's not just 3 legal interns or even attorneys. It actually needs 3 domain experts to confer, yes, we think this needs to be changed, or no, actually the machine got it right. And I see tremendous potential even within the content within documents of what can be inferred and what can be classified.
So if I'm understanding correctly, and let me know if I'm not here, set me right. As the starting point when data is coming in, you're using some forms of unsupervised learning to attempt to categorize this information. Initially, you were then moving on to a form of supervised machine learning where you would have individuals then train the system to become more accurate. But at this point, it's more using a form of supervised machine learning as a hedge against what the technology is doing, each to test the effectiveness of the other. And you're finding that technology is more effective than the people.
Yes, correct. And we had initially we had all this, these initial data sets. Maybe we had classified, 50, 60, 70 million cases, right? Before we turned on the machine learning process. But that was, out of the gate, it had a lot of stuff to work off of. Now that we're approaching, like, say, that 250 mark, it's much more accurate than the humans would be. And the great thing too is, like, the new framework we've moved to, it's not a rigid framework, right? So we can tag lots of things, right? So it can be, I like use the example of say it's a employment discrimination case, right? Well, that's a civil rights issue, right? That's an employment issue, and it can be both, right? And it can be lots of other, and maybe it's class action. There's another thing we can tag on. Maybe it's complex, and maybe it involves, workplace violence, right? And so there's lots of different stuff now we can begin to tag on. So depending on what types of query you want to make into our APIs, you can get data sets back to work with.
Do you do all the tagging yourselves, or do you attempt some sort of, if you will, crowdsourcing where you have others give others the ability to tag, and then you make decisions about what to do with that information?
Right now, we're doing it all ourselves, but it is the future of our APIs, being that's the majority of the traffic we receive, right, is to allow feedback via API for stuff that our users believe was classified wrong. And I think that's huge because we've gotten some amazing feedback, for example, from law firms on data sets, right? And when you're working with APIs, now it'd be great to just feed it back with us and tag it. Hey, we don't believe this tag is correct. It should be X, right? We also are working with organizations like Sally. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but I really believe that what they're doing is kind of the future, where they're kind of mapping out this legal genome, right? Everything from billing to litigation stuff to, how a firm runs, right? The type of data need to be structured at the firm level. And some of that, specifically the litigation data, overlaps with ours. There's going to be some stuff that doesn't overlap, where we just have our own system, but we're going to map a lot of our data to SALI standards, meaning, hey, this is what we call, this is what we do with it, but it's also equivalent to this SALI. So therefore, everybody has a universal system to talk to each other, right? When you're exporting stuff out of a matter management system or client experience system and you have your SALI tags on it, you can line it up with UniCourt's data, and then boom, you have your data set you want.
And if I remember correctly, Sally is SALI, Sally.org, is it?
Yes.
Okay, out of Stanford University, right?
That's a good question. I'm not sure the roots of where Sally came out of. That's a great question. It wouldn't surprise me. A lot of good things come out of Stanford and legal.
Yeah, I'm just looking technology right now. The Sally Alliance Standards Advancement for the Legal Industry, SALI.org. And it's for anybody watching now, it's a useful place to go for just a wealth of additional information. It's good to hear that you're working with what they're developing, and I assume contributing to the development of that as well.
Yes, yes.
As we draw to a close here, any previews you care to share for what's coming next with what you have to offer?
Yeah. So, I mean, in my humble opinion, we've been working on the latest version of our APIs, which is called our Apollo APIs. And imagine when we initially started, we had this app, right, and that provided access to court data and trial records, and we got a lot of requests saying, "Hey, do you guys have APIs for this?" We made our initial version of APIs. And imagine when we first created our APIs, we didn't really know what people would want to use it for. So we got all this fantastic feedback, right? And we've been collecting that for about 4 years. So in 2020, we began a pretty impressive project to rebuild our APIs from ground up with the concept of API first, meaning we develop APIs so that therefore there can be an ecosystem of people who want legal data that can develop off of those APIs. And then we can decide to make products off of them, or other people can make products off of them, right?
Mhm.
And so we've been working on our Apollo API since January for almost 2 years. Over 120 engineers have been designing, and we're pushing this out to alpha in November time. And the really key thing that distinguishes these APIs from our predecessor ones are this deep integration of an entity and involved in litigation, and this deep integration with analytics. So now you can pull, hey, this attorney, what type of litigation does he do? How much? Where? Show me all the people he's ever opposed, all the law firms he's ever worked for, all the judges he's ever been before. Filtered by virtually any data object that we have now. So I really believe this is going to provide a foundation on an analytical front to be able to, so you don't need to pull out 10,000 records and do your own data science on it, that you can pull the analytical data from our side. And if you want to validate or actually pull that docket, you can do that too.
Well, it sounds very intriguing. I look forward to seeing what that looks like. Josh Blandi is CEO and co-founder of UniCourt. I am George Sosha. This has been eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. Thanks all for joining us today, and please join us again next Friday for another episode. Josh, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks, George. I really appreciate you having me on. Have a great one.
You too.